True Crime Conversations acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast was recorded on. It's just before 5 a.m. on the morning of February 9, 2016. It was still dark outside, and Felicia Djamirze was lying in bed next to her boyfriend Dean. The house was quiet, and Felicia was just starting to wake up in that place of not quite asleep but not yet fully conscious of the world around you yet. When suddenly, there's a violent crash, jolting her out of bed. Seconds later, a door slams open. Shadows fill the hallways. Figures in dark tactical gear are shouting over each other as they move in. Felicia's heart is racing. She's had no time to react when a metal object is thrown into the room, landing on the bed beside her. There's a blinding flash followed by a deafening blast. Heat tears across her face and hand. She can't scream, can't breathe. Disorientated, she collapses against the sheets. She can smell burning. Voices are shouting, glass is smashing, boots are pounding across the floor. She tries to drag herself to get to some kind of safety, but her body's refusing to cooperate. Then she feels the cold steel of a gun barrel against her head. Is this a home invasion? What the gunman says will simultaneously make it all make sense, but at the same time, even more confusing. He identifies himself as a police officer. Rough hands pull her to standing and deposit her on a chair. She's badly injured, but the men who've stormed her home show no sympathy. They want answers to their questions first. The paramedics would arrive much later, their angry words blending into the background. Everything is a blur. There's lights and sounds, confusion, and so much pain as Felicia tries to make sense of what has just happened to her. Why were police raiding her house like this? Why would they throw flash grenades into her bedroom where she was sleeping? She knew why they would have the attention of the police, but why this level of violence to apprehend her and Dean? It was all part of a major drug trafficking investigation. But even though Felicia had just suffered third-degree burns and was seriously injured, she was arrested by the police who'd wounded her. I'm Claire Murphy, and this is True Crime Conversations, a podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. Just a heads up, we are speaking in some detail about domestic violence in this episode. Remember, help is available at 1-800-RESPECT if you need to reach out. Felicia Djamirze comes from a family that honestly could have a dozen books written about them. Russian grandparents who fled the Nazis in Europe during World War II, who for no reason that has ever been understood by the generations who came after them, ended up here in Australia. Their 11 children will make names for themselves in business, acting as a middleman between Russia and countries who would like to do business with the then Soviet Union. But in the background, there's generational trauma and alcohol addiction that tears family members apart. Felicia is born into this big, wild family who all live in a section of housing trust homes in Blacktown in Sydney, her formal education coming with a large dose of street smarts. But when she finally strikes out on her own, the notorious King's Cross becoming a second home to this wily teenage girl, she would make friends with those whose incomes did not come from legitimate sources. And while she finds herself dressed to the nines in designer outfits, she also has to navigate the world of bikies and drug dealers, a decision that will set her on a path that would ultimately lead her to that quiet morning, lying in bed, not knowing how it would change the course of her entire life. For a bit of context here, Felicia was convicted of drug trafficking, specifically involving the drug methamphetamine, and became embroiled in investigations into organised crime in Queensland. Her criminal activities included being both a perpetrator and an accessory within the drug trade, which eventually did lead to her arrest and conviction. She has since become an advocate for women's justice and trauma recovery, and she openly discusses her past to highlight issues of violence, poverty, and the criminal legal system. Felicia joins us now. I wanted to start off with your family because I feel like we could devote an entire podcast series to your family history and the incredible, amazing, concerning things that your family have done over the years. Not necessarily a true crime podcast, but maybe true crime adjacent, perhaps, over the years. But I'd really love you just to give us, I don't know, a quick rundown of your family, their origins, and just some of the things that made them stand out, because they seem like they're all quite larger than life.
Definitely. I come from a very big, loud family. And also a lot of people who have come before me, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, have been through unimaginable struggles. And I think of them often because I went through a stage where I felt I had to change myself, even down to changing my name. And since writing this book, I reflected on that and I thought I shouldn't have had to have changed my name in order to be able to get employment or to be accepted into society when my ancestors went through so much to keep their name, to keep their identity, fought in wars, went through being in, Nazi camps, great-grandmothers who have been in the missions in Australia. So many things that they've been through. I just really reflected on that and also the courage that it took for them to get through those things as well. So it's been really, really nice to be able to reclaim my name, which I've done recently. So the cat's out of the bag now. I can't, hide behind a different name anymore just for the sake of survival.
So your grandparents survived the invasion of Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
They're Russian origin, and for a long time they ended up sort of floating around Europe as refugees, unable to get back into Russia at the time. And then they, for some reason, unknown reason, end up in Australia and start a life here. They go back to Russia, but they come back to Australia again. And then you guys land in Blacktown.
Yeah.
In Housing Commission, which is where you essentially started your life too. Can you tell me a bit about what it was like in Blacktown at that time? Is that where the term housos originated, in the housing commissions of that kind of area? What was it like growing up there?
I can't say I know exactly where the word houso comes from. I've used it a lot and I've been called one a lot. So, but I don't take offense to that. I know I've been called houso before in a derogatory way, and I've always taken it as a compliment, because if you're a houso, that means you're made of grit. You've got a lot of resilience. You've got a lot of street smarts, and usually quite generous too. All the families in my neighbourhood were all really, really generous, good-hearted, hard-working people. So I never take offence to that. So I'm not sure where the term housos came from, but I'm happy to claim it as coming from Blacktown. My father's family lived in a cul-de-sac in Debbie Way, and the whole family when they came out to Australia. So that's why one of the chapters is called Djamirze Way, because basically it was like our street. There was so many of us crammed in there. The house that I actually grew up in, number 9 Debbie Way, was the house that the Murphy brothers' parents actually lived in. And when they were evicted, we moved in. So that just gives you a picture of what it was like and, the climate.
For those who don't know who the Murphy brothers are, they were found guilty of murdering Anita Cobby.
Yeah.
Back in the 80s, 70s, 80s. Yeah. So what was that like to live in a house already connected to crime?
I was told growing up that our house was built on, I don't know if this is accurate or not, but this is what I was told growing up, that our house was built on an old rubbish tip. And as kids, me and my cousins always imagined that there was probably dead bodies dumped in the garbage tip. So we always thought the houses were built on something quite sinister. So we always kind of had that already, even before I found out I was old enough to kind of have knowledge of the Anita Cobby situation, and that's the house that we were living in.
I would love to know what Blacktown was like then, because whilst you guys had your own little community and your own family cul-de-sac there, Blacktown itself was full, as you mentioned, of really hardworking, good people, but it was not an easy life for people growing up there, right?
No, definitely not. It wasn't an easy life. Everybody in that area was from a lower socioeconomic bracket. We all had our struggles. But growing up, I didn't really recognise when I was smaller. I didn't recognise those things. I would play with my neighbour, Abraham, and we would go and make toys out of sticks and rocks, and he was really creative because he was a refugee and he'd had to make toys out of nothing before in the camps. So me and him were happy as just making toys out of nothing and playing with my pets, always had a lot of pets. So growing up being small, didn't really feel it. It's as you get older. As you get older, you start to feel these things and recognize that, hey, my family might be a bit different to yours. You start to get that awareness.
Then things start to change for your family when the boys, as in your dad and his brothers, your dad Yuri and his brothers, they get into businesses and they start to make a really good living from it.
Oh, yeah.
And in fact, they start to do things like they're setting world records. They are, dealing with the Russian government. They become kind of middlemen between Russia and various other foreign entities, including Australia. At one stage, you mentioned that your dad may have been some sort of arms dealer at some point, but they really
I always
went
press
sort of
my
from...
mother for information, especially whilst writing the book, and she has tight lips. She said, I wouldn't know anything about that.
Okay, Brenda. So you guys are still living in housing commission, but the money starts to really sort of flow in for your family. And then your dad, Yuri, he's a spender. And so he's spoiling you and he's bringing you all these amazing things. That must have been like quite an eye-opener, but you were still young. Like, how did you process that looking back at it?
Looking back at it at the time, I again didn't think it was anything different from potentially what other families would do. And I love nice things. I wouldn't call myself materialistic, but I like nice things. I think we all do. And reflecting on that kind of relationship that I had with my father, he would go away for long periods of time overseas. So there would be an absence there and I would miss him a lot. And then when he'd come home, he'd have gifts, and it was almost like an overcompensation for the time that he had been away. And I kind of realized that in my adult life and in my adult relationship, similar things were going on with the gifting and men buying me presents and all of those type of things that I do talk about in the book. So I realized that there was a pattern and a correlation there. And I think we all look back at our childhoods and we can look where there's patterns and correlations in relationships and how our childhood life kind of can repeat itself in other ways in our adult life. So it was insightful for me to reflect on those things.
Well, as you grow up, you show that you have quite the independent streak. You're sent to a very strict school of which the rules you were not overly happy with,
No.
and so would often tell your parents, I'm leaving if I don't agree with what's happened today. And they were like, okay. But you are still underage when you start to head out into King's Cross in Sydney and start to really explore the nightlife there.
Yeah.
What was that experience like as a young woman? Because you're not naive. You haven't come from a place where you would be shocked by some of the things that you maybe would see in the cross. But what was that like as a really young woman navigating, there's going to be men, you're a beautiful woman, there's going to be men who want you, there's going to be men who want to take from you. Like, how did you navigate that?
At the time, I felt it was really, really fun and exciting. I felt a little bit bored. I felt a little bit bored doing the normal things that normal kids would do at my age, for example, 16. And I found a world that I could escape into, and I absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. One of the most fun times of my life. But if I had a daughter and I found out she was going to King's Cross at 16, I would not be happy.
Mm-hmm.
I look back and I think, oh my God, Felicia, what were you doing? What were you thinking? I was very street smart, so I always felt safe. But irrespective of that, there's always risks and dangers when you go out as a woman. Even now, there's drink spiking. There's all sorts of things that go on. Back then, the culture was a little bit different to what you would see now. So back in those days when I would go out clubbing underage, men would like slap you on the ass or grab you and go, oh, ha, ha, like act like it's a joke. And it was actually really socially acceptable at the time. There was no consequences. There wasn't any charges or I'm going to call the police or going to report you to security. It was really, really widely accepted.
Was that when you started to dabble in drugs and alcohol in that time, still underage, going to clubs?
I would drink underage, but I didn't do cocaine until I was over age. So I was a little bit older when I started to do coke. And I've got the type of personality, and if you know me, or my friends know this, I'm the type of person that will always say, oh, I want to try that to see what it feels like. I want to experience that. Not the greatest attitude to have when it comes to drugs.
Probably not.
But that's what it was a case of. You know, I thought, hey, why not? Everyone around me was doing it, and it was perceived as a drug of affluence as opposed to, you know, poor man's crack or, you know, all the other drugs that we see out and about. So I viewed it in a different way. I didn't view it for what it was, maybe, you know, just recreational drug. And in King's Cross at the time, if you had cocaine or you were doing cocaine, you were someone, you had status, you could afford it. And I think I like that aspect of it as well, because it played into me going there and being someone else. And also too, I could just forget about everything else that was going on and I could just enjoy myself.
Were you aware of the criminal aspect of those who were running the cross at the time, like the Ibrahims, etc.? Like, how across their activity would you have been as a young woman?
In regards to that, there was a culture of, you know, the women don't get involved in that type of stuff. It's unspoken. So whatever goes on, but it's the boys' business. It's really not women's business. So we get kept out of all of that. But you are aware that there is stuff going on, obviously. So, yeah.
So while you're escaping to the cross and dressing up to the nines in your finer things, which you've said you were quite fond of, home life wasn't the same. So your dad, Yuri, well, he sounds like a doting dad and a larger-than-life character, really struggled with the demons of alcoholism, and you were part of that downfall. In fact, you were caring for him a lot of the time. You talk in your book about sometimes finding him on park benches and having to sort of pick him up and take him home. What was that like for you to have those two very different worlds going on at the same time? Because anyone who's lived with an alcoholic or who knows an alcoholic knows how absolutely devastating that disease can be. How did you navigate that?
I think that there wouldn't have been two worlds if there wasn't the alcoholism to begin with. So I don't think I would have felt that need for escape if that wasn't going on in my home life. So I just learned to juggle those two worlds, basically. And it is really, really difficult. It's an awful disease. I forgive my father for his addictions, or his behaviours, I should say, because I know that he went through some really, really traumatic stuff growing up, really traumatic stuff. And culturally, and when we look at the Slavic culture, and also when we look at men, that's another layer. They're kind of taught to not be vulnerable, to suck it up. If you've got a problem, just have a drink and deal with it. Man up, basically, you know, have a cup of concrete. But how many cups of concrete can you have until it starts to kill you? So I don't think he was in an environment, or society was there at the time. It's a lot more socially acceptable for men to speak up now. Whereas, you know, when my father had his issues with addiction, it wasn't as socially acceptable. If you showed vulnerability or if you spoke up as a man, you were seen weak, not just in society, but also within the family too. You know, mental health wasn't a real thing. Man up, deal with it. So he was trying to deal with his demons the best way that he could.
So for him, his alcoholism really sort of took over his life. And so also to the passing of your grandmother, it sort of led to your family to fall apart a little bit. There was infighting between the brothers, and so businesses failed. They had to sell off property. So financially, you'd gone from rags to riches back to rags again, essentially.
Yep.
So you then have to find ways to make money. And so you dabbled a little bit in modelling and, you'd won a competition on Channel V and got money that way. But then what led you to Pageants? Was it about the money?
So the way that other people saw me, I used, I guess, as a commodity or a way to earn money that I felt was easy. What drew me to Pageants was the travel. And I guess that there again, there's that escapism that I was trying to do to cope with what was going on. So when you win the pageant, you get a trip overseas. And that's a really, really good way for somebody who's young to get a good trip overseas with a whole host of other girls and, you get to try new food and meet new people. And it was so appealing to me. So the beauty aspect of it, I didn't really care that much. I just wanted the trips and all the perks that came along with it,
I always had this idea that when you become a Miss anything, so you were Miss Australia at one stage, that there was this idea that you had to be kind of present this certain image to the public being a representative of the Miss Australia title. But, in the background, you're doing cocaine, you're out at the cross. Like, was there ever a question about you being Miss Australia and also doing, having the social life that you had?
Well, during the time that I was doing pageants, I wasn't really partying that much. So it didn't really interfere or cross over that much. Yeah, so no, that didn't really come into play too much. And I mean, I'm pretty good at keeping secrets, so no one really found out. Until now, and everyone knows everything.
Now you've said it to the entire world. What was that like, though, in the opposite direction? So after you were in pageants and you'd won those titles and then you are out partying, did people view you differently? Were you invited into a bit more exclusivity when it came to going to those clubs? Or was that just part of the fact that you were already part of the scene and kind of known at the nightclubs in the Cross that allowed you to essentially kind of just be a VIP wherever you went, right?
I was already part of that scene, and a lot of people that ran the Cross and that used to have control in those areas I grew up with. They're from the same gutter that I came from. So we always had that group or that crew. So all of the things that happened in my life, and it didn't matter where I went or what I was doing, for example, say I won a pageant or whatever it might have been, I still had that same circle of friends. The new people that would come in were just additions to that. But my core circle for a very long time was the other people that had also grown up the same way that I'd grown up. And we always stuck together.
Talk to me about being attracted to bikies.
The bikie scene and the bikies, very different back then to now. And I didn't go out seeking that. It's just that a lot of the people that I knew, or the men that I knew who were boys and grew up to be men, I already knew them from childhood. And I felt like we already had a lot of things in common. I could be fully myself with them and they could be fully themselves with me. There's always barriers there where if you meet a guy who looks really, really good on paper and then they see where you've come from, suddenly maybe you're not such a match for them because you're not going to cut it at the dinner table when, you meet their parents or whatever it might be. So all of the men that I dated or been with from that world, the appeal wasn't the fact that they were bikies or that they were in that world. The appeal was that we had a connectedness over the fact that we grew up under similar circumstances and there was no judgment. And I always felt very comfortable and at home with those type of people because I was one of those type of people. Well, I still am. So I guess that maybe explains it. So the tattoos and the good body is just a bonus on top of that.
You also mentioned in your book too that you kind of liked the bikie ethos in that, I am my brother's keeper, in that people were loyal and had each other's back and essentially became their own family. Was that something that resonated with you?
Yes, I did. I did like that aspect of it. That aspect of it was really appealing to me. And I think it was really appealing to a lot of the young boys that did gravitate towards that gang culture. So essentially, if you're from a broken family or you've had a traumatic childhood and you don't ever feel like you quite belong, you have a longing within your heart to belong and to have a family. And the bike clubs back then would fill that gap. And they knew that they filled that gap. And once they've got you, they know you're going to do anything you can to keep that feeling and that sense of family. And I've got someone to have my back, and because they're going to be there for me. And everybody wants to belong. So these boys that gravitated into gang culture, really it comes from a place of brokenness and a longing just to belong.
You're listening to True Crime Conversations with me, Claire Murphy. I'm speaking with Felicia Djamirze, a counsellor, Miss Australia winner and convicted drug dealer. Up next, Felicia tells us about her first real relationship with a bikie, the man who introduced her to the world of drug dealing. Talk to me about Cam. So he's the first real serious relationship you have.
Correct.
He's involved with a motorcycle club, and then things start to go south in that as he rises through the bikie ranks, it puts him more and more in the sphere of not just selling drugs but making them.
Yeah.
What did that do to him, and what did that do to your relationship?
When I first met Cam, the things that became issues later did not exist. And he was only a nom. So when you're a nom, it means that, you've just joined the club, you have to prove yourself, you do a lot of the shit kicker jobs, and then you have to move your way up in the ranks. And he moved up quite quickly. And when I was young and we were partying, I didn't really think much of it. I just thought, oh yeah, he's a nom, who cares, haha. I thought it was one big joke. I liked to go to the clubhouse parties. It was fun. It was exciting. But then things escalated quite quickly. He was very charismatic, great sense of humor, generous, and he was intimidating. He made a great standover man. If you make a good standover man, you can make a lot of money and you can move up the ranks quickly because everyone likes a man that can collect a debt for you. So he was very appealing in all of those ways for the club. I didn't expect for things to escalate the way that they did. When he started cooking, he started to become very, very mentally unstable. He wasn't well within himself. He started making a lot of questionable decisions, and I felt quite trapped. And he wasn't violent until the latter part of the relationship. I think at the core of him, he is a very good person. He just lost his way. He just lost his way with drugs. And I did everything I could to try and support him. I supported him to go into rehab. He went into rehab. He left rehab. He didn't want to stay. And it just got to the point where I thought, I can't do anything more to help this person, but nor should I have to. And at the time, I couldn't see that I was repeating the pattern that I had grown up with, having a father who had an addiction issue, that I was forever trying to fix Yuri and his issues. And then that just was replaced by Cam and his issues. And also I feel like maybe I accepted the behaviours more because I grew up seeing those behaviours.
So it does get violent later on as his exposure to drugs and his addiction worsens. And this is something you talk about in the book, which I think many women who've found themselves in a situation experiencing domestic violence is you might have had opportunities to leave and then chose not to, or you found yourself in a situation where leaving would potentially put your life at risk. And so you have to make so many choices and decisions that many people who haven't experienced domestic violence just would not understand. How did you actually get to the point where you're like, no, I've got to get out of this, and then make that final choice for yourself?
Yeah. With that, I wanted to leave for quite a long time. I found out that he was cheating on me, and obviously I wasn't happy about that. And for me, if someone cheats, done deal. Each to their own, but I'm very big on being honest and saying, hey, I don't want to be with you anymore, whatever it might be. But he wanted to have his cake and eat it too, as a lot of people do. So anyway, I wanted to leave from that point, but I stayed because he had the tendency to become violent. So anything I would confront him with, it could escalate into something that I may not be able to contain on my own, and I'd put myself and my family in danger.
We'd even gone to like the head of the bikey club, right, and asked for help.
Yeah, I said, he's loose and he's a cumbersome liability to the club. You should take his vest. He doesn't deserve to have such a high ranking in the club if he's acting this way. I actually said it's fucking embarrassing. And it is. What leader acts like that? A leader doesn't hit women in any sphere, whether that's the gang world or, whether that's in your everyday life or everyday world. A real leader and a real man doesn't hit women, doesn't abuse women. It's just, it shouldn't fly anywhere. So I went there and I asked for help. Look, I think their intentions were good, but the follow through wasn't. By that time, it was kind of too late. The moment I knew I had to leave past the cheating was when he strangled me, and he strangled me until I was unconscious, and I woke up in the hospital. And he strangled me because he thought I was looking at another guy at a party, and it was just his paranoia. Even if I was, nothing warrants any kind of, abuse. But he thought I was looking at some other guy at the party, and then he strangled me in front of everyone, mind you. So then after that, I thought, I really have to get the fuck out of this situation. And that's also too, and I'm not sure, it might be a bit more well-known now, but at the time it wasn't really that widely spoken about, that when strangulation is involved, the violence is likely to escalate into, femicide. And I thought, he's going to fucking kill me if I do not get out of this situation. But I needed to try and meticulously plan it because he had access to guns. And then he tried to shoot me. So after that, I literally left and I went to central New South Wales. I just got out of there. I had no other choice. But I was still fearful for my parents because of the fact that he was using so much. He was really, really loose. So when somebody is like that, you cannot predict what they're going to do. And he'd made threats against my mother. He'd made threats against my father. And because he was under the influence, I knew that there was a high potential that he could carry that out. And then sober up later and go, oh shit, what have I done? Because that happens in a lot of cases too. So, yeah.
Well, I guess you would never have imagined, but the man who helped you find out that Cam was cheating on you would end up being your next relationship. Because Dean helped, allowed you to use his Facebook to find out what Cam was up to. And then what was that connection like with Dean? And then how do you move on from coming from a situation that is that violent and destructive into allowing and trusting somebody else back into your world? How do you navigate that? And were you aware of Dean being involved in criminal activity as well? Did you see similarities between him and Cam at the time?
I knew that Dean was in that world to an extent, and that was part of the appeal. I wanted him to protect me because I knew that the police could not. So I had to find a way to protect myself. So that was through having a relationship with Dean. So our relationship initially, although yes, we were really good friends and we got along really, really well, there was a massive element there of me needing to ensure that I was protected and I was safe. Because when the police approached me after certain things had happened, they said, we can't help you unless you tell us where said club keeps their weapons. And I said, domestic violence and club issues are completely two different subjects. Let's not get those mixed up, boys. So, hearing that, I was just like, I really don't have a hope in hell of relying on the authorities to protect me or look after me in any way. And they, at the time, I don't feel, and I don't know about now, but maybe it's still the way it is now, Gang Squad doesn't see you really as a human. If you're the partner of somebody that's involved in organised crime, they see you as subhuman. Basically, they see you as a bikey mole, right? You don't matter. If something happens to you, it's just God taking out the trash, So I wasn't really surprised by what they had said to me, but I was deeply disappointed that that was their response. So I knew from that point onwards that I had to just look after myself, like I always have had to look after myself and just do what needed to be done, I guess. But entering into a relationship with Dean, very, very difficult. Very, very difficult to trust again. I had a lot of walls up. I had zero tolerance for any kind of bullshit. And I was quite fearful of going into a relationship because I had experienced so much hurt and so much pain that I just felt like I did not have the capacity to endure any more heartache. Little did I know there was a whole host of fucking heartache to come. Poor naive little me back then.
I love how you're laughing about this like it's not one of the most traumatic things I've ever heard, but we will get to that. Well, tell me about life with Dean to start with, because he's got property up at Hervey Bay, so you move from New South Wales to Queensland and it's a bit of a different lifestyle from the, busy cross nightclubs that you had been used to. So what was life like with Dean to start with?
I didn't like living on a farm. I felt it was really quite boring. No offense to anyone that lives on a farm. Probably now I think it was great. But back then I literally ate my way through every restaurant on the main street within a week, and there was nothing else to do. So I didn't really love that aspect of it, but I had the freedom and the capabilities to travel back to Sydney. I think I used to go maybe once every 2 weeks to see my family and to see my girlfriends because I had no friends up there. It was just me, him, and the farm. So, yeah, the farm life was not for me, but we had a nice, peaceful existence, but we also had a really chaotic existence. It's like two polar opposites existing at the same time in that situation. So there was all this chaos and drama going on, but then we're living on this tranquil, peaceful farm, and we didn't have any, problems between ourselves either. Our relationship was really cruisy and just lovely.
So Dean's business, he has a legitimate business as well as dealing in drugs on the side. And so are you involved in any of those businesses? Because when you were before the court, they did discuss the fact that you were cleaning scales or testing scales that would be used to measure out drugs. Beyond that, were you involved in any of Dean's other illicit business?
In Queensland, if you are part of any part of the operation, whether that's weighing scales, sealing a bag, whatever it might be, the law stipulates that you may or may not be liable to the same charges as the principal. And that's open to interpretation. So with me, the police decided to go in the direction of that you may be liable for the same charges as the principal. Now, I didn't think anything of it when I weighed the nativia on the scales. I really just did it, and I just did not think anything of it. Maybe by that point in time, the situation was somehow so normalised in my mind because of the life that I'd had previously with Cam, because crime was quite normalised in my family to an extent growing up as well. And then I really didn't see the seriousness of it. And I wasn't involved. I was just the girlfriend, and I think the police just like to frame it that I was involved. So, yeah.
Next, Felicia tells us what she recalls of the night the police raided her home, leaving her severely injured with third-degree burns. Stay with us. Let's go to that night. You're asleep next to your now fiancé, Dean, when something smashes in through the window and it explodes.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the night of the raid. What do you recall as opposed to what we now know actually happened in that moment?
Yeah. So at the time, I really didn't think in a million years it was the police, only because I felt if the police were going to come, they would come and they would present a warrant like they always had. It wasn't,
because you'd experienced raids while living with Cam, right?
Yeah. I'd been through quite a few raids previously, so I just had a preconceived notion of if we did get raided, this is what it would look like. And boy, was I wrong. But anyway, I woke up and I could just feel my face and my hand was just on fire. And I actually thought that I had been shot in the face. I thought it was home invasion. And I'm laying there and I'm thinking, fuck, I've been shot in the face, but I'm still alive. So I'm just going to lay here for a bit and pretend to be dead and just see what happens. And I thought, shit, whoever's done this home invasion, I'll give it to them. They've got balls. Like, I was kind of impressed a little bit. I thought, fuck, you got some balls. But anyway, I'm laying there and I think I've been shot in the face. And then I hear police and I was shocked. I thought, oh, fuck. It was maybe even, I felt it was worse that it was the police and there was a home invasion. I don't know, but I was thinking, fuck, we've been pinched. It's all over. And then, yeah, the rest is kind of what unfolds after that.
So we now know that they threw stun grenades into your bedroom where you were sleeping.
Yeah.
One exploded on your face. Another took out as you were crawling across the floor, hit you in the elbow and your hand. And so you are quite seriously injured at this stage. But you are conscious, which is amazing, I think, considering the injuries that you'd sustained. Police come in, they hold a gun to your head, and then what happens? Like, do they get you medical attention? Like, what happens in the immediate aftermath of that?
So I started crawling towards the walk-in robe to get some kind of shelter because I didn't in a million years think that they were throwing grenades. I had no idea what was actually going on. I was very disorientated because there's smoke and there's also a sound that is emitted that disorientates you. And
is it like what we see in movies where like your hearing is ringing and you can't really hear what's happening? Voices are muffled.
Yeah. Exactly like that. Yeah.
Okay.
And the first grenade that they threw through the window was actually a military-grade DefTech grenade, and the ones that came after were flashbangs. So the initial one, the one where I thought I'd been shot in the face, was a grenade that was actually used in the Man Monis siege, the Lint siege.
In Sydney.
Yes, and it hadn't been used since then until it was used on me, which I felt was quite ridiculous. Anyway, so I'm crawling to get into the walk-in robe to get some kind of shelter. And on my way into the walk-in robe, that's when a tactical officer steps through the bay window and puts the gun to my head, and he's demanding to see my hand. Both hands need to be above my head, but because my elbow was blown out and my hand was completely mincemeat, it was very, very difficult for me to actually show him my hands. And, he kept screaming at me and with this gun, and I just thought, fucking calm down. Like, I don't know what they thought by doing that. I don't know whether they thought I was going to pull out an AK from under my pillow and start, shooting, or there was just, like, I felt I'm not the G.I. Jane of the fucking drug world. I thought there was really no need for this. If you'd knocked on the door and presented us with a warrant, we would have complied. So there was just really no need for that excessive use of force. But yes, I was very badly injured. I was not given any burns first aid. They asked us to unlock our phones. If we didn't unlock our phones, they were not going to call the ambulance. We didn't unlock the phones. More than 40 minutes went by. I was in immense pain. Finally, they decided to call the ambulance. When the ambulance come, they were quite pissed off at the cops. They said, why didn't you call us earlier? Because she's going to go into shock and she might lose her hand. So the ambulance officers were not happy. And also too, if you're going to use weapons such as that, you think you would have had and if you're so worried about the safety of your officers that you have to use those weapons, would you not have had a fire brigade and an ambulance on standby? It just was all a big fucking balls up, ridiculous situation. And when I was wheeled out to the ambulance, I could see that there was military tanks in my front yard and on my property, and there was diggers digging up the ground. And I was just like, well, this morning gets more and more bizarre, So, yeah, that's basically what happened that morning.
You, on reflection, think that you probably would have avoided charges had you not been so seriously injured in that moment. Can you talk us through why you feel that way?
I feel that way because if you charge somebody that is just a civilian or the girlfriend of or whatever it might be, it looks really, really bad. It still looked bad, but it looks really, really bad. But if you injure a drug dealer, social perception is, fuck them, they deserved it. And when I was in hospital, I actually got a lot of death threats to the point where they had to change my name to an X in the system because people were calling up and threatening me. I really didn't care at the time. I was on that much medication. I said, oh, whatever.
Well, you had other problems to consider in that moment,
I had
right?
way worse problems. But people would call up and they would say stuff like, I hope she fucking dies. You shouldn't be treating her. She's a fucking drug dealer. She's killing our children. And that's all this shit. I just thought, you bunch of fucking losers who know nothing about life and nothing about society, and who are very narrow-minded. So, yeah, that was a pretty hectic experience. That was when I started to be put in the media, like the front page of the newspaper that said, cops blew up my face. That's when the death threats kind of started.
When did you realise that you'd been set up?
Oh, I always had a bit of an inkling, but, you know, you don't want to make those kind of allegations without some sort of truth. And I think to get arrested or to get pinched is one thing, and that's fine. It's the consequences of your actions and you need to cop it on the chin. But when it's as a result of somebody that you love and that's close to you, that is the worst kind of betrayal. It feels worse than, look, if anyone's ever been cheated on, like if you as a woman or even as a man have ever been cheated on, it's that on steroids. You think, how the fuck can somebody that's been through similar things to me and come from where I've come from do this to me? You know, it's almost like you cannot believe it, and it fucking hurts. It's horrible.
Because you do suspect that it was quite a close friend of yours and Dean's who tipped police off.
Yep.
And there's some trail of evidence that points that out. But didn't one of them come and visit you in hospital even in the aftermath of that? And in the book you do explain that whilst they did betray you, they would never have hoped for you to be hurt.
Well, that's what I like to believe. And I also think too that if you do get charged with something, you need to cop it on the chin. Like I said before, it's not a game of Monopoly. You know what the consequences might be, that you might get charged and you might go to jail. So if that happens, your get out of jail free card should never be putting someone else under the bus. That's weak and that's wrong. And you just shouldn't do that shit. It strikes a nerve with me. It strikes a nerve with me.
Do you feel like it goes against that I'm my brother's keeper that had attracted you to the bikey clubs, that there should be a sense of loyalty even amongst criminals?
Yes, 110%. And also pick a side. Don't sit on the fence. You're either a cop or you're a criminal. You can't be both. It's just the same as a dirty cop. No one likes a dirty cop. No one likes a criminal that sits on the fence. You know, but pick a side and don't be so wishy-washy. Have a fucking backbone, you know. Don't just pick a side when it suits you.
What was recovery like for you with all those injuries?
Oh,
it must have taken years for you to get back to any kind of normal.
Absolutely horrific. I really felt a very big and deep sense of loss like I've never felt before, for the loss of the person that I was prior. So there was a big identity shift. I'm still me, of course. I'll always be me, but there was a really, really big sense of loss that no matter what I do, I cannot get back the person I was prior to that trauma. And that was really hard for me. I even remember I used to look at my hand when I was going through all the operations on my hand. I still don't have complete feeling in my hand. I've got a lot of nerve damage. There's a lot of things that I talk about in the book in regards to my injuries. So I remember looking at my hand and feeling like it didn't belong to me, like it didn't belong on my body, but there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. But I felt like it was this foreign entity on the end of my arm, and I couldn't reconcile that it belonged to me. It was so bizarre. I don't know whether other people have had that experience when they've been injured or burnt or whatever it might be, but that was really, really difficult for me as well. And I worked really, really hard to get better mentally and physically because I felt like I had to. And there was a bit of spite in that. I felt like I've got to get better and I've got to get back on my feet and I need to become the best possible person that I can, because everyone's expecting me to just, end up not how I've ended up now, the opposite of how I've ended up now. And to prove a point, especially to the police as well, that you can't do this to somebody or allegedly do this to somebody And, you know, it's just, I had to prove a point. No, I'm going to come back bigger and better. And that fueled me. That spite really, really fueled me.
I mean, I guess whatever the motivation, if it gets you through something as traumatic as that, and then come out the other side, which is quite an incredible story unto itself, because you've kind of sat yourself down and gone, no, I'm going to get my shit together now, and I'm not going to be involved in any criminal activity. Because I guess at first we need to backstep a little bit. The trial, and because Dean obviously is sentenced to 10 years.
Yeah.
Do you do any jail time over your touching of those scales and your role in Dean's business?
No. Originally, I was charged with trafficking, production and supply. And then towards, the date as it was getting closer to going to court, the production and trafficking charges were dropped. So then supply was remaining. I didn't do any jail time. I was given a 3-year sentence, but to be served in the community. And I feel like the fact that I was still undergoing procedures and I had been so badly injured was leveraged to my advantage. And also too, I want to acknowledge my privilege, because if I had been a woman of colour, or I hadn't had the legal representation that I had, and if I didn't have all the references and all of the educational background and all of the things that I was able to present in court, and I couldn't present the way that I did, I probably would have still been put in jail even though I had these injuries. So I just want to acknowledge, my privilege in that situation, that you are viewed differently dependent on how you present, the color of your skin and your looks. So, it's just completely unfair, the things that go on in our courts. But that's a whole nother episode.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So for you then, though, to head back out into the world after your recovery, you study to be a social worker. You've decided, I'm going to be on the straight and narrow, because you can't put a foot wrong now, because you're serving your sentence out in the community. Any wrong step and you are in jail for sure.
Yeah.
So how do you restart when you've still got that hanging over your head, but also you're trying to find a job and gainful employment? Like, we know what the stories are like for people who come out of prison to try and start again, that it is such a difficult process. What was it like for you?
It was terrible. It was honestly terrible. There is so much discrimination that goes on. You are not valued for the skills that you have gained post-conviction. You are seen as your worst mistake forever, it seems, in Australian society. It's kind of like it's a life sentence. And I think that women are disproportionately affected by this, because we go into more caring roles. So there's a lot of checks, and I understand the reason behind the checks, but it needs to be on a really individual basis. The checks need to be on a really individual basis. So with men, they can go into cashies. Like a lot of men that come out of, for those that don't know, cash in hand jobs. Men can come out of prison, they can go on Centrelink, so they're getting Centrelink, and then they're also getting cashies, and they've got plenty enough money to, get back on their feet. Not saying it's easy for men. I've seen firsthand how difficult it is to reintegrate through the experiences that Dean has been through since coming out of prison. That's also been really, really challenging. But I feel like women are really disproportionately impacted, because we go into nursing, counselling, social work, and there's so many stringent checks, and all of the hiring practices in a lot of the companies, it's just a conviction history means a big no. So I'd like to see that change. I know that in the field of law, there's a lot of lived experience lawyers that are up and coming, and they are being accepted into the bar. So if potentially health and more of the women or women-dominated industries could take on the way that the legal industry is handling things and use that as an example, that would be really, really good. I had to lie. I had to change my name. I had to hide my past, even though I had done all the work that I needed to do to move forward. And all I wanted to do was be welcomed back into the community. I wanted to give back. I wanted to work, and I wanted to pursue an education, and I wanted to have meaningful employment. I think that a lot of people who have conviction histories are kind of robbed of meaningful employment, and they're expected to do menial jobs even when they have skills that society so needs. So I'd like to see that change. You shouldn't have to lie and hide your past because you fear being judged or discriminated against. With me, I got found out a lot of the time, so I kind of just skated along, and then something would pop up in the media. The police would leak information to the newspaper and someone would see it and I'd go, oh, I work with her, or I've seen her before. And they'd dob me in and then I'd get the sack, and then it would all start, the cycle would start all over again.
I want to get back to where that led you, but you did mention that you had seen firsthand what being in the prison system had done to Dean on his release. And this is something I think was quite an eye-opening conversation in your book, is that you feel that people who go to prison are upholding their end of the bargain. They're giving up their freedom to do their time.
Mm-hmm.
But you feel the system is not upholding their end of the bargain because they are not rehabilitating people. And there's going to be this big discussion right now about prison shouldn't be fun. It shouldn't be a nice experience. The whole idea is that your liberties are removed from you in order for you to learn a lesson. And I understand that too. But you feel that Dean came out of prison worse than when he went in. And you can see that in a lot of those lost boys that you talk about. They end up returning to crime, or they end up being even worse criminals on release from prison because of their prison experience. What was Dean like when he came out, and how did you help him not just fall apart at the seams?
Very institutionalized and had a lot of unprocessed grief because there had been a lot of death during his sentence. Obviously, because it was such a long sentence, there had been my father's death and he had to say goodbye to my father over the phone. He had his stepfather's death, his stepfather who raised him and who he was very close with. He had to say goodbye to him over the phone. And then also there was the death of his younger brother whilst he was in prison. And when you're in prison, you cannot show emotion. If you show emotion, you'll be viewed as weak. If you're weak, then you'll be targeted. There's a whole dynamic that goes on there. And also too, if you're seen going off to the psychologist or the counsellor, people will think, oh, they're weak. We can kind of pick on them. So everyone really shies away from that aspect of it as well.
Felicia, I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours about your life and your experiences. It's so fascinating. But I think I'd like to end and just ask you, how do you view yourself now after reflecting and writing all of your experiences down?
I dedicated my book to myself, which my mother thought was pretty funny, and I had a laugh about that too. But it was because after it, I thought, you are one tough motherfucker. You are resilient. Good on you. Like, I really was able to come to a point in my life where I could be proud of myself and the things that I have achieved since coming out of that life. So that's probably the biggest thing that I learned through that as well. And that situations and people are complicated and complex. And also I want people through my story to understand that nobody just ends up in jail. Nobody just ends up in a domestic violence relationship. Nobody just ends up with charges where they might face 25 years in jail. There's always a backstory. And it's not an excuse, but it is a reason. And that's the core of being human, is to understand each other. And when you can understand with another person and connect with them, then you're more likely to give them a chance and welcome them back in to the fold. So that's just the core of being human. So I really hope that is what people can get from that.
Thank you to Felicia for sharing her story with us. You can find her book Accessory at the link in our show notes. True Crime Conversations is a Mamma Mia podcast hosted by me, Claire Murphy, and produced by Tali Blackman, with audio designed by Jacob Round. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another True Crime Conversation.